the information is all just a little bit muddled, so I don't think I'm going to be able to remember too much of the information, but I'll do my best. So let's get into it. I hope I'm going to pronounce her name right. I watched a documentary on it, and I kind of hope, like, I heard how they pronounced it. I'm just not entirely sure that I'm going to get it right, but I hope so. So this is the case of the murder of Raonaid Murray. So Raonaid Murray was born on January 1st in 1982 to her parents Jim and Deirdre Murray, and they lived in Glengarry in South Dublin. She had an older brother and an older sister, and she had just finished secondary school, and she got really, really good grades. She completed her leaving cert in June of 1999. So a leaving cert is like your high school diploma. She started working part-time in a clothing store in Dunleary, but she did intend to resit her leaving cert. She was trying to get into the arts faculty in University College Dublin, and I'm not sure if her grades weren't high enough for that, but she was planning to resit her leaving cert. So my guess is that her grades weren't high enough for it. So she loved reading and poetry, and her dream was to become a professional writer. So she really wanted to get into that arts faculty. So on September 3rd of 1999, she woke up a little bit late that morning, and she was supposed to go to the Institute of Education to sign up for her classes to redo her leaving cert. But she knew that she wasn't going to make it and then also be on time for her shift in the clothing store. So she went to work instead, called the Institute of Education from work and said, I'm really sorry, I'm not going to make it in. Can I still sign up for these classes later? And they said, yeah, you can just come in next Monday, put down whatever classes you want to take, and we'll sort you out. So she was really happy with that. And other than that, she had a very normal day. September 3rd was a particularly hot day, and by the time her mother paid a visit in the store, she was sweating. She had taken off her shoes and she was walking around barefoot. Her feet were swollen. I mean, this is Ireland, okay? We don't have air conditioning in stores because it's rare that it gets really hot here, and if it does, it's never more than a couple of weeks. I remember, I think 2 years ago, we had a heat wave that lasted for 2 weeks, and that was probably the only heat wave I've ever experienced in 15 years here. So we don't get very cold winters, we don't get very hot summers. So she had been working in that store all day in a very hot day without air conditioning, so she was sweating. But other than that, very normal day at work, nothing out of the ordinary happened. And around 9 p.m. she finished her shift, and she met up with a friend of hers, and they went to a pub called Scott's Pub together, where they spent the night with a couple of friends. They wanted to continue on to one of their favorite nightclubs that they went to a lot, but Raonaid said, I want to go home first and get changed and, get out of these sweaty clothes, put something else on. She said, I'm just going to meet you there, and she left Scott's Pub around 11:20 p.m. It was only a 15-minute walk from the pub to her house. It's not entirely clear what route she took, but there are a few eyewitness accounts that place her on specific points along the way, so people saw her along the way. Then, somewhere around 25 minutes later, there were eyewitnesses who only heard it, so they didn't see anything. They heard a girl most likely Raonaid arguing with someone outside a small lane that went into her housing estate. So it was like a little lane with like just one paved bit in the middle, and I'll put a picture up of it if I remember. And it was like surrounded by walls of the other houses and by some trees. But it's also not a strange thing, you know, like we have lanes like this everywhere that go, it's like a footpath into a housing estate if you're not taking your car, something like that. Okay, so they described the man she was arguing with, so I guess they did see it, or some people at least saw it. A man described as being in his mid-20s, and they heard her yelling at him and saying things like, "Leave me alone, go away, fuck off." And then it was followed by a scream. And then around 12:20 a.m., she was found murdered by her own sister, only 50 yards from her home. Like, that lane was right by her home. She was almost home. She had been stabbed 30 times in total, 4 times in her side, chest, and shoulder, and these were the fatal wounds. She was stabbed with a 1.5-inch sharp knife. So an investigation was launched, but police were completely in the dark about this one because they couldn't establish a motive. They had no idea what anyone would want to have this girl dead. She was liked by everyone. She had a lot of friends. No one that they knew of or that anyone knew of had problems with her or was carrying a grudge against her or anything like that. So they just didn't know who to look at because they didn't have a motive for this case. More than 100 Gardaí, which are police officers in Ireland, were assigned to the case, and by 2008, so 9 years later, they had interviewed over 8,000 people and almost 3,000 statements had been taken. There were 12 arrests in total, but they never panned out. And the knife used to kill her was actually never found. So, in the build-up to the first anniversary of her murder, there were fresh appeals for information by the Gardaí for people to come forward, and each year, Raonaid's family launch a new appeal for information. They've offered a reward of €190,000. I can't believe that number is correct. I don't know if it's a typo everywhere or if that's actually the number, so don't take that as being completely true because I would think it's more 19,000, but it's what I found is that it's €190,000. So Gardaí have renewed their appeal for information because they think that if anyone witnessed this at a time that they were very young, they would have matured enough at this point that they would be willing to come forward and talk about what they saw. On the 10th anniversary in 2009, Gardaí issued descriptions of a male and female who they wanted to interview on this matter, but they were never able to find them. So there have been a couple of suspects for the murder. The earliest suspect was a man in his mid-20s, the one that was seen by witnesses. He was about 5'10" tall, with sandy-colored Oasis-style hair, like a lot of the witnesses compared it to the hair of Noel Gallagher from Oasis. He was wearing light-colored combat trousers and a beige top, and he was the one that was seen arguing with her. A taxi driver reported picking up a young man with blood on his trousers in the early hours of that Saturday morning and talking to him. He told police that he dropped a man at a house and told them where that was, but he felt like he didn't see the man and go into that house. Police went door to door in that estate to try and find this person, but they couldn't. So there's a chance that he asked the taxi driver to drop him off there and then walk somewhere else so that he wouldn't, the taxi driver wouldn't know exactly where he lived. Later in the investigation, a man matching that description was found to have been living at that time on the other side of that estate, and he was arrested and questioned, but there is no evidence to tie him to the case, so they had to let him go. A cook was also arrested and questioned, but later released without charge. I found a couple of things about this cook where a lot of people seem to think he was involved, but for as far as I'm aware, he was working that night and they really had nothing to tie him to it. I think he was just considered a shady person, and he had, like, there were rumors that he'd done other crimes, but they couldn't tie him to it. Then there was a person, and I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong, called Farah Swali Noor. He was a Kenyan immigrant who was killed and dismembered by two sisters from Dublin. He had allegedly threatened their mother and said, "I'm going to fucking kill you, just like I did with Raonaid Murray." But he was allegedly drunk at the time. He was actually questioned during the initial investigation, but he was ruled out. So, this is now a cold case, and they brought in a cold case team that they call the Garda Serious Crime Review Team, and they began a review of the case in July 2008, and they identified a number of mistakes and oversights in the original investigation. They recommended renewed searches for the murder weapon, but I believe to this day it has not been found. They found a couple of areas where it was seriously failed, so they determined that some potential witnesses who came forward with information were not followed up correctly. There was also tension between different Garda units during the original investigation, which meant that communication didn't happen the way it should have. It could be that they were purposely withholding information from each other because they were arguing at the time or something. So after a while, the review team suggested a couple of new theories. They do not think that it was the work of a random killer, but that Raonaid knew her killer, especially since there was no record of a similar attack happening before or after. And they believe that because of how she was killed, it was actually not a man, but it was a woman. Most likely someone who held a personal grudge. So it's likely that she was killed after a personal disagreement. And some people even say that she might have been killed by a love rival, like someone that was jealous of Raonaid and some guy, but she wasn't dating anyone at that time that her family knew of, but, at that age, doesn't really mean anything. They did identify a woman who they thought might have been able to do it, who they thought might have had an argument with Raonaid, but she left the country a year after the murder and still lives abroad, and I don't believe they've ever questioned her. But it's interesting because there's a lot of people online who believe that she was killed by a woman rather than by a man. However, witnesses saw her arguing with a man. But there's a lot of information in this case that I found it difficult to research because A, there's not a lot of information, and B, whatever is there is very muddled up. Like, she was found at 12:20, which is an hour after she left the pub. People heard her arguing outside that lane 25 minutes after she left, which is already longer than it would take her to get home. So it's kind of a question of why did it take her longer to get home than usual? And then I've read other reports that said she was arguing with that man about an hour before she was killed, which makes no sense. she was found about half an hour after she was seen arguing. So even if she wasn't killed in that argument, which is highly unlikely, it still wasn't an hour after they saw her arguing, you know? Like, there's a lot of bits in this report that I was reading through and thinking, I don't know how to interpret this because it is like vague, contradicting information. And I do believe that she was killed during that argument. It wouldn't make sense otherwise, because if she wasn't and the person she was arguing with left angry, she was 50 yards from her house. She would have been home in 2 minutes, you know, like she must have been killed during the argument. But according to witnesses, it was a man. They saw him. They also heard his voice. And yet police now seem to think that she was killed by a woman. So it's a very strange case. It is one of those cases that freaks me out a little bit because she was seemingly killed for no reason. Like, I mean, I'm sure whoever did it had a reason. I do believe it's a person she knew, but nobody had a reason. So she was either being harassed by someone and didn't tell anyone about it, and that person ended up killing her, or someone might have silently hated her without her even knowing and then just killed her out of nowhere. Like, that freaks me out to think that one day I could be coming home and someone I know who I thought was my friend would stand there waiting for me and kill me. Like, I find it so strange that someone who seemingly had no enemies went home after a normal day of work, nothing out of place going on in their life, and they just get killed. I don't know what to do with that. I find that really scary, especially again in a place like Ireland. Dublin these days is not nearly that safe anymore, but Dublin in 1999, and it wasn't even Dublin, it was Dunleary. It's not even, I don't know. I find it such a strange case, and I really hope that they are able to find more information on it. So that was everything in this case. Yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.